This is Chip Jacobs, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
The standard COVID caveats apply. Sometimes hilarious things happen, and you give it up to the gods of creation.
Yeah,
and wonderful things happen. So we have Chip Jacobs with us today. He wasn't the scheduled guest. Our scheduled guest had a crisis come up, and so she's postponed, and we'll get back to her at some point. And because she's a realtor in the Bay Area, I have my very good friend Eric Hoagland come on because he's a realtor in my hometown. We were actually just talking about Save the Brave off mic and how his company, SD Realty, wants to partner with us. And so we were just having this, we turned this into a business meeting, but now we get to talk we get to talk to Chip as an author, and maybe we'll lean on him for some charity stuff, Eric. But kind of a disjointed intro, and I want to introduce Chip in a second. But first, I want to slow down and say, Eric, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for going on this crazy ride with me because we weren't expecting this. And it's going to be a fantastic conversation. And then Chip, if you would, for our audience, since they were expecting to see this high-end real estate broker come on and talk about real estate, and now we got Chip. Tell us who Chip is and why we care.
Well, I got my real estate license. It's funny because I'm very conversant with real estate. My dad was a real estate developer. The book I have coming out in a few months is a true crime book. It's called The Darkest Glare. And it really is about the lust for land, especially in Los Angeles. And how, if you let greed get in front of your principles, you could wind up, pushing up daisies. And Los Angeles and land just go together like, tea and honey. And it hasn't stopped since Chinatown. And my story is about the assassination of a businessman who let sort of his avarice get away from them. And he, when you want to develop something, and millions of dollars are on the line, people will go to any extent to claim their share. Anyway, so my book is about the Colorado Strait Bridge. It's called Arroyo. It's historical fiction. I'm a former journalist. This is my written nonfiction books. This is my debut into the world of fiction, creative writing this way. And, it was a trip. It was not always easy. But I have a high affection for irony, sarcasm, and absurdity. And I didn't want to write your typical historical fiction book, which tend to be plotting and self-serious. And there's this rule, you can never bring in famous people in a historical novel. I said, screw that. I have in my book Adolphus Busch, who founded Budweiser, Upton Sinclair, the greatest muckraker, one of my heroes, the writer of The Jungle. I have Teddy Roosevelt in there and other, folks. There's a little Led Zeppelin in the later part of the book. So I wanted to embrace the era, but my book takes place in the turn of a century America, 1913, a very optimistic time where we weren't fighting each other. We weren't saying 2 + 2 = 17. There was technology coming on that we would love and later loathe, like cars, electricity, frozen foods. It was the beginning really of the modern age. But in Pasadena, this landlocked little town northwest of Los Angeles, building this bridge welcomed the cars, allowed investment. And it was a very vainglorious piece of concrete to show people Pasadena is exceptional. And this is my hometown. There you go. So
that's the bridge.
That's the bridge. And, it's got these classic lines, timeless, where you could stare at it forever. And some people do. It's also, And so, Pasadena, because of the Rose Parade and because of museums and this cachet it has, it has an ability to make people accept myth more than other areas. And if you would believe the myth, you would think this bridge just appeared like, baby Jesus on, long ago, with no issues of ego, design disputes, claim over credit, alteration of plans, and it had all those and more. And I got interested in this story when I did a freelance piece working on another book about a deadly construction accident that really nobody ever talks about, and occurred as they were racing to get past so many hurdles and make up for lost time, and 3 men died. And when you walk on this gorgeous landmark bridge protected, under federal protection, you will never see any mention of these people's names. And if I can, be honest, that really upset me. And I feel like I always have to kind of get angry to really write something. And I felt like that I was doing it for them, as well as to clear the name of the bridge. People around here, when I grew up, we called it Suicide Bridge. I didn't know it was called Colorado Street Bridge. And one of the hypotheses of my book is something called animism, which is the idea that certain inanimate objects can seem alive because they're reflecting the intentions of their creators. And over 150 people have jumped from this bridge. It's sort of the city's moral wound. There's been epic battle between preservation and the sanctity of human life. And so I thought that was a perfect entree for me.
We recently had a guy named Eric Nussbaum on, and he wrote about Chavez Ravine and the challenges of people and progress.
Yes.
And like you have this opportunity to take a premier ball club from New York, which today, like if you could bring the Mets to any major city, you would bend over backwards and kick people out of their homes to do it. Because
wait a second, have you seen the Mets records over the last year? They should be paying us to come here. But anyway.
Actually, when the Dodgers moved, they were still a championship grade team. So imagine, a championship grade team coming. And so you have these things where, push and shove come together and something else decides it because, you're a rock and a hard place and someone brings a bulldozer. And these stories are impossible, especially in LA, because, no one's got time for your feelings in these kind of deals. And so all of a sudden stuff can get way dicier. I'm interested in your thoughts. Like, how does this compare with Chavez Ravine and Dodger Stadium and how we kick families out of these places, but also get this? I mean, it's the third oldest ballpark, and it is an absolute gem and has, I think, overall been fantastic for LA.
Varying a little. I mean, it doesn't. The story of Arroyo. What I'll just say before I go back to baseball, one of the things that I learned was sort of the gentle ruthlessness of cities to exploit crises. So after the bridge collapsed, right before this gorgeous automobile loving, new culture, welcoming structure went up, the city of Pasadena, there was this collapse of the bridge. People died. Part of it occurred outside of Pasadena city's borders. So what did the city of Pasadena do? After they got the bridge up and all the congratulations and photographs and press attention, they went and annexed the land that the bridge was connecting to before Los Angeles got its greedy mitts on it. So there is a Chinatown element, and they did displace some people when they, went across the Arroyo Seco. But the bigger effect was just the idea that you could poach lands on the back of somebody's death. Okay. Yeah. Going to your question, I've actually, when I was a reporter, I've written a lot about redevelopment, understood the history of the story, and the history of Los Angeles is a history of dislocation. Long ago, it was Native Americans who owned this. Well, then, the Spanish came along, and then it's ceded to Mexico, and Pasadena was settled by Midwesterners seeking a better life without a drop of alcohol, which is ironic because we had Busch Gardens founded on beer money, and they displaced Native Americans. With Chavez Ravine, it's similar to another part of Los Angeles called Bunker Hill, which is this glass and steel building topped area of downtown. There used to be working class families there. And, one person's progress and, acknowledging the inevitable is another's loss of their hometown. And I'm actually working on something else about the history of the Long Beach Freeway, where there's tons of people that were threatened to lose their homes and houses. And one of my heroes, besides Upton Sinclair, I have to say, is Teddy Roosevelt. And if you want to spend a fun day, tapping into somebody else's just genius wisdom, go look at Brainy quote on him. And he once said, not all movement is necessarily progress, and we do become enchanted with concrete. Los Angeles is built on the horizontal ideal. We weren't going to be New York or Chicago and live in tenements and apartment buildings. We were going to live in subdivisions with backyard swimming pools, and the freeways were our expressways to that lifestyle. So yeah, I mean, it was. I have not read that book. I would like to read that book. You could go around the whole city of Los Angeles and go, hey, they used to live there. Hey, that was somebody's hometown. Even in Pasadena, when they were going to build this freeway, they carved an enormous ditch. I mean, you could probably fill 10 Rose Bowls with the amount of dirt to prepare for a freeway. Well, guess what? There was, low income people living in that area when there was a knock on the door. Hey, you got to move out. We're making way for civilization to expand, and it's going to be all in concrete. That was one of the funny things that I learned about this book in writing Arroyo. Concrete, back in the day was equal to the microprocessor chip. It was going to break new barriers, and you could build anything with concrete. And in fact, there was exploration of thinking we're going to build a battleship in concrete. Yes. Nobody understanding, the science of buoyancy apparently. But if you think about the world today and the state of the United States, I could make a case. It is about our affection and adulation to embrace technology without really contemplating where it's going to go. And it's impossible to do that. But, think about Twitter. Think about Facebook. Well, back in the day, that was our concrete. Our cars being pumped out of Detroit. You show somebody something new and shiny, and, it's going to be their impulse making the decision, not their intellect. Sorry, I've had a lot of coffee.
So if I can jump in there, I'm fascinated by the idea of this book that the inanimate animates and actually has a personality or takes on a personality of maybe imparted to it by the greatness around it or the sort bad of blood. Sorrow and bad blood that's associated with it. And we're seeing this bridge today, and you say even today we've got people jumping off this bridge, and it seems to be carrying that. Whereas maybe Dodger Stadium has a glow of, hey, this is baseball, all America. It has a different feel. It's an interesting thought.
Yes, it is. Maybe the Dodgers didn't win some World Series that the handicappers thought they would. And somewhat a reflection of the fact. Well, this land used to be people's houses, but I suspect it's like that whenever there's a great endeavor. I wrote a book about China's environmental catastrophe where they lose 3,000 people a day to smog. And you would not believe the displacement there. And people sold down the river because somebody wanted to build a gleaming condo, that party apparatchiks and princelings and others could buy. It is the story of the world. Somebody's ox is always getting gored so somebody else can get rich. LA is that story over and over again. On the bridge, one thing that just blew my mind is that the Pasadena went and got like the world's most famous bridge designer. A man so famous, he had 2 middle names, John Alexander Low Waddell. By the time he came to Pasadena, he had been building span lift bridges, that open up in the Midwest so barges could go down the Mississippi River. He had been honored by the Emperor of Japan and, the duchesses and such in Russia. When he comes out here, he's building in a tricky ravine where the soil changes quickly. And he designed a straight bridge. It wasn't supposed to curve. You don't curve a bridge under old bridge orthodoxy. There's very few curved bridges in the world, And he went back to St. Louis, and behind his back, Pasadena City Hall changed his plans. And that created a feud that is echoed. And I got, using my old journalism skills, got a copy of a letter he wrote to the city of Pasadena saying, "Oh, Mr. Mayor, in the future, when people question this bridge and its integrity, what will you say?" And that was just part of, the drama in this bridge, besides death, missed deadlines, animals not wanting to be around it, the feeling that you were building on something where the Native Americans held precious. I mean, it is like going into a haunted house and flipping off the spirits and saying, I dare you. You
Hmm.
know, I feel like that. So I don't know if I believe in all the paranormal. There's a very large segment of Angelinos that do believe this bridge is haunted. And, you know, I think we create our own hauntings.
When we talk about LA and these landmarks and
Yeah.
suicide, like the Hollywood sign, everybody immediately says, that's Hollywood sign. I want to go see it. And didn't someone jump off of that thing? Like it's sort of like this inanimate object becomes a symbol of something.
I don't know.
And the other thing I wanted to ask about too.
Yeah, I don't
Go
know if
ahead.
they did. I don't know what they did. I think the only people falling down around the Hollywood signs have snuck around the security cameras, gone over the fence, and brought themselves a box of wine.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
So,
Well, I know, but I mean, it is like it does have that thing, you know. Anyhow,
There is something strange though about this bridge, and you know, it went up in 1913. By the end of like 1919, 1920, it already had a reputation as a beautiful place to die. And Charlie Chaplin filmed a scene out of his first movie, The Kid. It's a brilliant silent movie where he features this idea. This bridge is a, you know, sort of a magnet for the depressed to come. And, you know, the word got out.
it is sort of an artistic expression too, jumping off the
Yes, it is.
Coronado Bridge, jumping off the Golden Gate, you know, bridge.
Yep.
These are beautiful places. It's the ultimate tragedy with the ultimate beauty, you know, being the cause of it or whatever. It's interesting.
Yes. Tragic.
Well, the corollaries to now, in particular, this book, you know, you had the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. You had World War I. You had all these things kind of happen. You can correlate to that, the feelings that we have today, but instead of a bridge, we have social media. We have Facebook. We have Twitter, where people are, I don't know, I don't want to minimize it, but they are creating that same kind of feeling about negative all the time, because that's the underpinning of our society right now. It's a negative underpinning.
You make an excellent point. In fact, you know, it's my premise, and I think it started in Pasadena, you know, which was really an early adopter of the automobile. Once you had people going in automobiles on newly paved roads, which became expressways, which turned into freeways, you are fueling social isolation. And that's why I think, you know, people get in cars and they reflect a different personality than they are outside of it. You know, and so we created cars, and now people are not interacting as they would if they were on a trolley or a public bus or just freaking walking, you know. And I think social media turbocharged this, and it makes it, when you're in a car or behind a keyboard, it's very easy to lash out and fear and objectify and dehumanize people, you know. And so though the bridge was glorious and we were welcoming, quote, the machine age, it was also beginning of a very sinister time where it made it easier to, you know, cast aspersions on people and, you know, demonize them. So I have very mixed feelings about the car. If I ran LA, I would start closing down freeways and make people adapt. That's what the pandemic showed us. We are damn good at adapting. You want to see one of my old masks.
I also wanted to bring up that the Arroyo Seco Parkway was the first, by most accounts, the first freeway in the United States. And when you get on the 110, you know, so let me picture this for the audience. Picture a 2-lane high-speed freeway.
Yes.
That the on-ramp is a stop sign, a right turn, and mash the gas. Like there is no time to fool around, and terrible visibility when you're looking like, I mean, imagine coming off of a surface street and immediately being on a freeway. There is no on-ramp at a lot of these spots.
That's true. You need to have a dragster to get on there. So
Totally.
yeah,
And it's sort of like the Twitter feed. It's like that when you jump into the Twitter feed, you're like, oh my God, this is horrible here. You know, it's dangerous.
Yeah. And don't you think it would be funny to have a party with you and all your Twitter friends? Do you really think they're your friends? And when you saw them, you would go, oh my God, I really got to go read a book. You know, yeah. You know, I did some real quickly. I did some research. I've been doing research on the Parkway. You know, it's the most people believe it's the first freeway in the western United States. It's debatable about nation, but you know, you could quibble. Right. But you know, it was meant to be like a scenic drive with medians in the middle and plantings and landscaping. It was, you know, it was like a Sunday picnic cruise. but today, of course, like you're saying, and later on when cars got more powerful, you are putting your life, in your hands. A columnist for the LA Times, who's a friend of mine, once wrote a feature about it, and she said the Pasadena Freeway or Arroyo Seco Parkway, drive it the way you dance, which means, with quick reflexes.
Wow. And the other thing is if they were to expand that freeway and to make it safe for modern things, people who have money who live there would lose their minds. And they won't stand for it. Like, it would be in a massive fight. So again, we have this thing where we want this bridge, we want this parkway, we want these things. And as long as there's poor people involved, we can just knock them out of the way, bring in the bulldozers, shove them out. But if we started, like with Chavez Ravine, if we started with the process of, hey, we're going to not only give you like either money or a house, but above market, we appreciate you making the sacrifice. If we started there, it would be cheaper than having this shit. I mean, what does it cost to get a bulldozer from the corporation yard up into Chavez Ravine to start knocking down homes? I mean, that's the cost of a house right there from the start, So
yeah, I mean, somebody once said, and I'm sure it translates to sports arenas as well as freeways, but they don't ever build someplace where people have money and lawyers. They're going where people feel disenfranchised and worried. And they don't want to raise a ruckus because what might come back their way. And it's sad. I don't have an answer for it, but I do know that nature has a way of paying us back. And I think we're seeing that these days. The Colorado Street Bridge, I must say though, in that era, I fell in love with. And as the pandemic got worse and divisions deepened, I found myself really wishing I could find a time machine. And I could, time warp myself back to that time. If you go back and read those books and literature, people were so more articulate. Their vocabulary was not limited to about 150 words, if that. They knew about science and were interested in the world, and took time, for neighbors and family, and went to things called like a lecture or a reading parlor. I mean, it sounds pretty darn good. Not that I'm not a big fan of Netflix, but I think with that slower age came with more people had more tranquility. Now, of course, they're very thin if you look at old pictures because they have to walk every place, and there's not a Carl's Jr. on every corner. But I still, the romantic in me wishes I could go back to that time and ride a wild ostrich, which I do feature in my book.
Well, who would have thought we'd be talking about eminent domain, which is a real estate thing, during a book, but this is exactly what we're talking about here. And as we populate, and we're seeing a big shift right now, people moving out of the city because of the pandemic, out of the city. As they do that, we're going to see more and more of these towns that were set up, these little suburban towns that were sprawled out that had plenty of room, suddenly are not going to have pretty much room. They're going to have, hey, we need a strip mall here. Hey, we need a better road. They're driving in and out of here. We need a better road. We never used to need that road. That's coming again as people use the internet and spread out. People don't think of that. They think, oh, well, you can spread out. We're going to be further away. I actually disagree. I think there's going to be more cases of eminent domain coming because of this.
Maybe, but I will also say this is our opportunity to reimagine how we work. In Southern California, the old reporter in me remembers reading a lot of boring, long documents about the job housing balance, right? And, we built suburbs and we built exurbs, and there's people that will travel hundreds of miles every day just for their job. Well, there's a thing called the internet and, high speed, web trafficking. Virtual reality is coming. Maybe we need, not for everybody, but maybe we need to unlatch from that idea of eminent domain or the idea that we're going to have to use the freeway to go 75 miles to your job, because now you're just logging in every day. And I actually think telecommuting for some could be the thing that helps save the world. Balance, stabilizes neighborhoods, reduces carbon, puts less stress on infrastructure. Look at the incredible transition people made. God bless those that don't have jobs but from working online. Yes, there's nothing like human contact, face to face, definitely. But I think we need to tear up our old concepts of what makes for a healthy city. And, in terms of eminent domain, I've written a lot about the redevelopment agencies of California. I'm proud to say I think I helped put one of the nails in their coffin. And whenever you looked at redevelopment agencies, you always looked at the corporations, and they always seem to be getting the money, even though their CEO was making $20 million. Whereas a mom and pop on Hollywood Boulevard, which has had the world's most dramatic redevelopment story, they were getting, $400 and a coupon to Subway.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So yeah, but it always is about the land in California. It always comes back to the land and people, whether it's acreage or in my true crime book, it's about a couple space planners, and you build a building once, but you modify the inside of that building countless times, and there's a lot of money to be made. And sometimes when you work in certain people in construction, you don't want them with your home address. So I'm very much sensitive. It's real estate. That should really be part of the California flag.
Yeah, that and water, right?
Definitely.
The big fight over north to south on the water. And what's the old saying? Whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So. There's also a saying. There's two things in California, you don't mess with the guy's taxes or guns. But I'm not sure that I agree with that.
Let's go back to people choosing this spot to end their life. There are so many places in Southern California to jump off of. There are so many different ways to do it. What is it about the beauty of this spot? It's a long fall, but you could jump off of any interchange overpass. You look at the 10 and how many places are 80 feet up, but we don't see that same kind of magnetism. You talked about the animation of an inanimate object, but dig into that some more. And is this part of wonderful, people aren't killing themselves by jumping off of Frank Lloyd Wright houses, but maybe his architecture doesn't inspire that. What is it about that? How do you make of that?
I don't. That's an excellent question. I'm not I love sociology, but I'm not a psychiatrist. I think there's a couple factors in the equation. One, I think people that are hopeless maybe want to see something beautiful in their last breaths, and the mesmerizing grandeur of the Colorado Street Bridge is almost like a finger saying, "Come on, here's your place to do it." I think people that are in a bad place are very sensitive to things they read in newspapers, later on TV. And when they see somebody, hey, Joe Smith just jumped off it, it seeds in their mind, what, maybe this is not a bad place for me to go as well. Back in the day, there weren't any other big falls like this either. In the 30s and 40s, there really weren't towering bridges in Southern California. Yes, Coronado, I don't know what year the Coronado Street Bridge was. That's a bit of a commute for somebody that's suicidal. One of the things I'm learning a lot about is how preventable a suicide attempt is with the right fencing and offers to help. There's a lot of emerging research saying many people that want to jump off a bridge are younger schizophrenic people. And if you can stop them a first time, it's highly unlikely they're going to jump again. Well, but back in the 1913, 1930s, 20s, 30s, there are lots of people, the most people jumped off the bridges during the Great Depression, right? And you had bankers, stockbrokers, bond traders. You had, of course, mothers, and there was one famous incident I won't detail here. I'll let people read it in the book. But it was a very bleak time in the 1930s. People don't realize it, and those saying, well, 2020 is the worst year in history. It's not true. It's not true. In many ways, the world is never doing better. If you go look at UN statistics, but the Depression, it seemed like people almost were standing in line to jump off that bridge. And I think back then, financial failure was much more stigmatized. Almost like having cancer. and people were ashamed and disgraced, and they couldn't go get help. And especially the male psyche does not want to admit weakness. And that bridge was very tempting when, the stock market crashed. And so it's sad, and I hope those people, went to a better place and will come back and, will drive the bridge their next one. But it's something very creepy about how the bridge's storyline was hijacked by suicide, and also something really infuriating how the city has, been very inconsistent about what they've done about it.
Interesting. The idea about it becoming Suicide Bridge over, the Arroyo Seco Bridge is, what if there was an alternate universe where people weren't doing that? Or what if 50 years earlier or 70 years earlier, 80, we figured out that, hey, some fencing and the city has a negotiator on site ready to go. I mean, LA County has fantastic response mechanisms to get to people like this and give them one extra barrier. Maybe they go somewhere else, but maybe that whole stretch of freeway does become that gorgeous parkway.
Maybe it does. I will say though, the city of Pasadena did take some steps. So when people first started jumping off it, they stationed police officers on opposite ends. This world famous piece of concrete, takes you like 35 seconds to go across. I've timed it. Mm-hmm. And it's only like 1,500 feet long, believe it or not, But the city station police officers, they when jumpers, quote unquote, got wise to that, they wouldn't come out there. So the city had some officers dress up like as ice cream salespeople. There was other kind of clever, nuanced measures they took. Eventually, a rather ugly fence went up after there was an attempted murder-suicide off the bridge in 1937. It's in my book. It's probably the most terrible thing you've ever heard, where a despondent young mother drives out from Los Angeles. She lost her job at a cafeteria, obviously mentally ill. She stands on one of these beautiful benches in these flyover pedestrian bays. She has like her 2 or 3 year old daughter with her that has written her name Myrtle, or has written a baby's name Jean on a piece of paper, and Bobby pinned it to her dress and threw her over. Mm. She thought the world was so dark she was sparing this child grief, and then she jumped over, but something miraculous happened. The child lived. The child hit like a tree and pachinkoed down, right, and survived with no broken bones, bruised and nicked up. But, she's crawling around next to her dead mother who did die, And I actually interviewed this woman, and you would think she had been touched by an angel. No grievance, no resentment. She said it was a miracle that she'd been saved. But the city of Pasadena, this was all in the papers after this happened. I guess I am spilling the beans on this part of the story, but now I'm into it. So the city put up an ugly fence, and they got very defensive and angry. The media were calling it a suicide bridge. Mm. And a year after this incident involving Myrtle Ward and her daughter Jean, the city actually hired actors to recreate Myrtle Ward coming out and trying to throw her baby over, but she couldn't do it this time because there was a fence up that the city of Pasadena, in all its benevolence, installed. And I think that was so disgusting at any age, because they made it about themselves and their ego. And I think those things ricochet in the universe. And I couldn't believe it when I read this. And since then, even today, there's a raging debate about what kind of barrier to put up on the bridge. So things never change.
Yeah. Why the early teens? Why that era were you drawn to that for this story? There's a lot of things from LA that you could write about that are landmark.
Well, I wanted to write a historical novel. I'm so disappointed when I read them. Now, when I go back and read historical nonfiction like Erik Larson, that man is a genius, and I cannot get enough of his writing. But I wanted to write something like me, which is sarcastic, quixotic, a little bit absent-minded. And when I thought about the era, the bridge was built, at the turn of the century. and it was a transition between the old way of life and the new civilization. I mean, there was a wild ostrich farm in South Pasadena, servicing the primarily woman fashion industry.
Of course.
There was this incredible railway up into the San Gabriel Mountains called Mount Low Railway, with Victorian hotels and taverns and incredible technology to get people up these very steep mountains without losing your hat in the wind. There were Busch Gardens, considered the eighth wonder in the world, built by Adolphus Busch. 70, 80 acres of nature preserve, trails, swales, sunken gardens. It looks like heaven. It looks like, so, I mean, and on top of that, you had two other culture wars beginning. You had the war over alcohol that eventually led to prohibition, and you also had the suffragette movement. All those things were just perfect for a novel, because we're seeing like America, like a cell, mutating and refashioning itself. And so, I put that in there. I added in, a clairvoyant dog, because dogs to me are the best people, often the best people I know. And, that upset some people and thought, made them go, oh, this is just a silly romp. But, I think dogs see in nature and in energy what we're blind to, because we're too obsessed with, our own itinerary and satisfying our ego. Animals really don't have ego. And so I do have that in there. And, my book has done very well, but I did anger some people, by making these claims that the bridge is, the bridge is spooky. It's because of our, humans' involvement. They didn't like the dog is not a talking dog like some Disney movie, but the dog can communicate in certain times telepathically, and he's sort of like a guardian angel trying to get my main character, a guy named Nick Chance, to do what the stars intended for him, and it's tell the truth about the Colorado Strait Bridge, and I do believe this, that if we don't fulfill our highest order, we come back again, but maybe it's going to be more difficult this time. And so that, my book, 90% of it's in 1913, and then the remaining balance is in 1993, and Nick Chance comes alive again, knowing that, this rudderless existence he has is for a reason. And it takes a dog and some other, elements to make him realize it. And it's all around the bridge. So really, he's in love with the bridge. In his first life, he hates it in the second. And then he comes to realize why he didn't do his duty and tell the truth. And that really is what we should be all doing these days. Our loyalty should be to the Constitution and the truth, and that's what I do miss about journalism. You're not writing for an audience. You're writing to peel off, what forces want to put around the truth. So
it's
what fun could I have by going to 1913 and trying to tell it? And so honestly, when you go back there, you could just see falling in love with a beautiful woman, twirling a parasol and buying her ice cream cone and saying, let's go sit down with a book, or let's go take a picnic, and I don't know. It's the civilized West, right? It's the taming of the West. It's the civilized West. The East Coast had been doing this for a long time. Now LA is finally this civilized, Western, very uniquely Western, but place. It's a new place. It's a new country almost. It is.
Yeah.
Yes, it's something in high school. I learned something called the Turner thesis, which is about manifest destiny. One thing I didn't work in the book because, it's a novel, it's about characters, but I got curious about a piece of research I didn't expand on. Pasadena almost died like 10 years into its existence because of real estate speculation. And, outside forces and locals realized, oh my God, this city, Pasadena in 1913 was the third biggest city in California. It was, there was San Francisco, there was LA, and then there was Pasadena. San Diego was developing other areas. And speculators and land sharks and brokers, the gluttony and greed and gleam in their eyes was incredible. And, at one point, so many people lost their shirts with knocks on the doors. Hey, sign this paper. It was a little bit like the movie There Will Be Blood. Sign this over. Or, we want to buy your land, or you want to buy our land. And deals were happening in back rooms and on streets. And there was so much activity, it depopulated the city of Pasadena, and between real estate speculation and drought, there was a question whether it would exist. Eventually, some sanity came back, but this frenzied, no offense, but this real estate, lust for land and eager profits almost doomed this beautiful town. Look it up.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
Does William Mulholland play a role in this at all, since he was such an integral guy to making Southern California a habitable place?
I know all about him. He makes a little cameo appearance in the book, only because they were completing the Owens Valley Aqueduct the same year as they're building the Colorado Street Bridge. And if you think about it, you have 2 out of the 3 Jakes of Chinatown being satisfied, right? You have water and you have land. You have water that, LA basically kind of hoodwinked the folks in this, Sierra, up north, sort of, tapping into theirs, as he famously said, there it is, take it, as the water gush to this giant pipe. And then you have land, or you have land in Pasadena where, a bridge is making a division accessible, over a canyon, And then later in my life, I wrote about air quality in a book called Smog Town, which is probably my best known book. And, there you go. It's like elements of life. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, he does make a little cameo in the book, and, talk about people that got screwed in a bad real estate deal. There's a guy named Lancashire and Van Nuys, who got outfoxed and surrounded by land syndicates, William Mulholland, the Los Angeles Times, Chandler family, and others. And, where they held these vast tracts of land, to quote Monty Python, they were holding very little money later. LA was not part of the San Fernando Valley. So this era in the turn of the century, it was a very Game of Thrones time where people go, oh, this is mine and not yours. And you come across here, you may be dead. So, that spirit is in the book. We don't always know what we're getting ourselves into when we claim something as ours.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. It's that level of the intrigue, and that area is so big. And so even now today, you can be pretty far from the middle of anything.
Yes.
And if someone wants to cause your demise, there's no help coming in a lot of places still to this day. Now go back 100 years ago, and yeah, you're out in the San Fernando Valley, it can get real bad for you, So the ability to be thugs. And I guess you take someone like Mulholland, if we're going to be unfair to him for a minute, you have these visions and this capability to create this really nice, great place, but the money, the power, and these things start to corrupt these visions, and everybody, we don't go towards,
absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. In Pasadena, wouldn't have existed if somebody didn't come and create a dam and a pump house to trap waters coming out of the San Gabriel Mountains, and that gives you a lot of power. The person in Pasadena that did that, a man named Mr. Scoville, wasn't like Mr. Mulholland. He had more benevolence and public mindedness. Mulholland was a water engineer, and, he was doing what he thought was right, but, he was also part of a giant, in a way, a bit of a cabal. And then, of course, years later, the St. Francis Dam bursts and 300 people die. This is, right. Something he designed. So I don't know where he's come back in his next life. Reincarnation fits into Arroyo. So I'd be interested to see, maybe he's, downstream of the next dam that's gonna crack open. But it's, it is a fun, writing a novel is a fun way to immerse yourself in history you've forgotten or never knew. And I do love that part of it, and I'm a classic over researcher. I would have been happy being a doctor of sociology deep in some library, writing academic papers 7 people read. And so that's, one nice thing about journalism is it teaches you can have, your knowledge should be, they say your knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep. Well, to write a historical novel, you may have to go 6 inches deep, but you still don't need to know everything about the internal combustion engine, elements of structural construction with concrete, those things. You read a few things and then you translate it, and hopefully the characters, are what really, animate and make those things interesting. You can't write a history book and call it a novel.
So now that you've done this, you've done the journalism, you've done the hard hitting, deep digging stuff. Now you've taken some of that and you've done fiction, historical fiction, a novel. You feel like you've kind of completed part of your 2 sides of your brain. You finally feel like you've done the connections inside of you that kind of complete you in a way. Never.
One of the, I don't know. I have a fire in the belly. I cringe when I go back and read any of my old books or look at my old newspaper stories. I wrote that. Nobody caught that. This mistake, this inelegant way of putting it, I want to get better every book, but I feel far from completed as a human being and as a writer. And so I'm working on my next book. It's going to be Pasadena centric. It's going to involve the bridge, but it's not going to, highlight it's not going to, the bridge is not going to be the bedrock of it. It's not going to be the bread and butter. So I want to learn. I want to learn from all the mistakes I made in Arroyo. And like a lot of first novelists, you ask me a question. One of the problems I had is I tried to work too many things in. Yeah. And when you get some criticism, people. The biggest criticism I think of my book was the transition between Nick's 2 lives was jarring. And I tried to make it funny. I tried to make him awakening to his old life in Banana Republic. As he's trying to get pushed some, politically correct shirt. So my next book, I will try to be clear and more careful with those things. But I still want to learn. That's the great thing about being a writer. Whatever you do, you get to learn something new. When you're a journalist, you get to go behind the velvet ropes or cheap tape, and that's just the coolest thing, And so I'm never happier, actually. I think besides being at the keyboard, the cracking open a book and going, oh my God, that's going on page 7. Nobody knows about that anymore. So, I'm, as my mother, rest in peace, would say, my curiosity really made her want earplugs sometimes because I was always asking why.
This exploration of history, I love it. I love to look at these different characters and just sort of examine them. Like I've been fascinated with Laura Ingalls Wilder recently, and just reading her incredible work. Yeah. But there are so many of these great characters, and then you read through. And so, just for example, I'm kind of going back to your thing about journalism. When people dig up someone who's been dead for 70 years or however long it's been now for her, and they start to assign current ethos to who she was based upon 10 words in a book written so many years ago. It makes me like the contrarian to me is like, that's BS. I'm going to go read that. And then you find out what a wonderful person overall she was. Does she have a political lean?
Yes.
Yeah, but we can take that. That's not a hard, but when the journalism is founded on 10 words in someone's life,
forget it. That angers me so much. And I do have 2 millennial daughters, and I call this historical relativism. And it's when people go back looking for grievance or racism or small-mindedness or cruelty, in an era they don't understand, absent any context, and it's so unfair. And I wonder how they're going to feel when somebody does that to them. Oh my God, you were on Facebook feeding Mark Zuckerberg's tyrannical ego or whatever. It's so cruel and unfair. And, on Twitter, there's this whole pitchfork mob that likes to go back and investigates what somebody said when they were 12 years old. Some football player lost a scholarship.
Right, he did.
Over not apologizing for an action he took when he was like in 9th grade.
Right.
That is, we become like, the most judgmental society. And now we're going back through history. So I mean, of course, slavery. Many of the founding fathers had slavery. Well, that was part and parcel of the culture. Yes, it was wrong. Show me somebody that is committing mass murder or rape or something where morality doesn't change over time. Yeah. Nobody endorses slavery, but we should understand where it fit in 200-300 years ago. And right. So what you're saying really makes me mad. And somebody, I said something about like George Bush relative to our current person in the White House, so I'm not a big fan of. And that person goes, George Bush was a war criminal. No, you were going back and making judgments you have no idea about. And he wasn't. Save a war criminal for Adolf Hitler or Pol Pot or whatever. Yeah. So I feel very strongly. One thing I learned about, like Adolphus Bush, who was a German immigrant. He created this mythology that he came to the United States without 2 nickels to rub together. That's not true. He had some money, but he also had incredible vision, intelligence, determination. He modernized. If you like beer, you should be wearing a little necklace in his honor with the Anheuser-Busch Eagle. He got ill, probably from drinking too much of his own product. He also actually didn't like beer as much as champagne, ironically enough. For all his money, he died a long, painful, slow death. And when I was reading about the Bushes in a biography, he was like, all the king's men and all the king's horses could not make Adolphus Bush well again. He suffered. Upton Sinclair. I mean, these are real people. These just aren't memes. Upton Sinclair, when he came to Pasadena, he was a very ill, burned out, depressed personality. His fame blew back on him. His health was in the dumpster. He had being pressured by his publisher to imitate the jungle again. He didn't want to do that. And I like reading about people's frailties and how they overcome that to leave their mark on the world. But man, if you went back and read Upton Sinclair today, somebody that's out for him, they could find objectionable things he said in the book. So I mean, it's preposterous, and I wish they'd get called out.
We're not the angels we pretend to be, and they're certainly not the devils we make them to be.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And there is nothing in this world without context. There isn't, but we sure live in an era of snap judgment. That's kind of why I wish I never had to go back in social media again. I'm an author, so, it's an essential part of my life, but I'm not learning anything. It's just making me depressed and angry and nothing. I mean, if I was younger, I would do a whole novel about a group that just goes back and condemns historical figures, and then I would jump in time and having, their ancestors judging them.
Along those lines, I get aggravated when people say they want to be in the right side of history. It's not for you to determine. All you can do is be the best person you can be and help out, and then live it and realize your mistakes and just try to improve. You can tear yourself apart deciding if J. Paul Getty was a good man or a bad man.
True.
All I know is that he created one of, if not, it's a crown jewel museum. And it's in our Southern California area, and it's wonderful. Did he do bad things too? Of course, but he also did good things.
Right. Yes, that's true. There's people that don't like Theodore Roosevelt's legacy or Abraham Lincoln, saying, well, he wasn't as principled as a politician. It's you have to be very careful when you go back and make judgments. Unless you were there and you drank the water of the generation, what do we really know? And in some ways, think about World War II. We kind of glamorize the greatest generation, but I mean, I don't know if we understand what that entailed, being on a troop carrier, or what life was like in the Depression before they got drafted. On J.P. Morgan, in my true crime book, the monster at the center of it wanted to imitate the kidnappers that stole J. Paul Getty's grandson. Remember, they turned out to be Italian mafia, and they grabbed him. They held him for a really long time. They did a Van Gogh on him eventually. But, J. Paul Getty took so much heat because he was negotiating with the kidnappers.
Right.
You know, they sent him a ransom. He goes, F you, I'm not paying it. You know, this is, you know, I mean, it seems so hard and cruelest. And that's after he didn't pay that, the kidnappers got increasingly desperate. And that's when they disfigured his grandson. You know, is that hardball tactics, or is this somebody who is trying to, you know, produce a release of somebody who's captive? I don't know. But J. Paul Getty is a very interesting guy. You know, I went to USC. I'm very proud to be a Trojan. But, you know, some of the people there, you know, believed in the eugenics movement. And, you know, they're having their names stripped off things. That's all well and good. You know, I think we're doing it like taking down a monument. We're doing it for today's generation because it's offended, you know, a huge number of people. We have to be careful about going back and saying this guy was Satan.
Yeah, your fellow USC guy, John Wayne.
True.
You know, I mean, here's a guy that for more than one generation was the king of Hollywood.
Right.
And now we're looking back saying, oh, look, he said this one day. He did this one day. He was this way or that way. And it's a scary thing to do that because
yes, because you're not really capturing. Yeah, you're not capturing his whole life. Well, what about all the people John Wayne helped, or the millions he gave to a cancer hospital?
Yeah.
I mean, of course we see it repugnant, and it was repugnant back then. But man, we have dug up the Duke and have just pilloried him mercilessly. Yeah. I don't know. You know, he was an actor. What the hell do we care what about his politics?
Right. Exactly.
Seriously. You know, I mean, I love many rock stars, but when they start talking about things they don't know, it's like, oh my God, can't you just play an encore? You know, but I mean, you know, if John Wayne had been a rapist, if he had, you know, systematically mistreated people, that's something else. He gave a ridiculous and disturbing interview. I think it was the Playboy magazine in 1971. Yeah. You know, okay, let's put that in the context of his broader life. Ronald Reagan, you know, he did help end the Cold War. You know, I'm a center left people. A lot of my more liberal friends can't stand him. You know, he was captured saying some racist things, I think in the early 70s. You hope people evolve and grow and, you know, maybe they'll be more determined to right or wrong if they were part of the wrongs long ago. You know, that's you know, like in the political ecosphere today, why do we care about what somebody did 4 or 5 years ago? Or Joe Biden mistreated somebody at the Anita Hill. Yes, he made massive missteps. What the hell do we care about that now? It's who is he today? How is he going to lead? Where did that regret and absolution figure into his personality? You know, for the next generation, I really wish we could implant censors in politicians. So the first time they want to go and smear somebody's kid or talk about something they did 17 years ago, they get a nice, you know, 240, you know, zap. Does that make me bad?
No. I think being reasonable and rational and understanding. Mostly we don't know anything about history in general. You know, we can go back and you're like, what about these other 5 characters from the exact same time? Or ask someone to speak intelligently about American slavery for more than 5 minutes and they'll run out of things to say. We just know it's bad and it makes us mad at people. Like if we're not going to understand it, we can't deal with it. Like the 3/5 compromise. This is a reflection of us today. This is what they had to do to make this country happen at that point. That was a deal. It didn't mean that blacks were less human. It meant that this is how we're going to deal with this political problem. It's a horrible outcome, but are we any better now? If we had to make an amendment pass right now, we all know we can't even agree. Tens of millions of us can't agree on the election outcome right now. So we got to ease up on the historical people because we're no better now.
I mean, on the election, Joe Biden won. I mean, what's happening is it's frightening for the future.
Sure.
And to go back and rewrite history, even if it was November 4th or 300 years ago, I mean, it's I can only think that after the Civil War, Reconstruction, the Depression, 1968, those are very darker times. But I don't think people were questioning, numbers and, certified results and other things. We've never seen gaslighting like this. I thought that was just a great, Alfred Hitchcock movie. I never expected it to be a national phenomenon. So I don't want to deal into politics. I'll tell you, I do wish if there was one guy on Twitter, actually there's two people I wish could come back alive and have Twitter accounts, John Lennon and Teddy Roosevelt. And man, we could use some of their sarcasm and wit. And
well, if we could see it, because I think that the biggest looming thing with all this is the tech giants do control the information.
Yes.
The idea that years ago people would go to a lecture hall and sit down, like you had mentioned earlier, and sit down and hear a lecture from a traveling person that happened to be in town, and they get to hear a view from another city, another state, another place, right? We have this amazing thing called the internet where we can do that. Until the tech companies decide which content you're allowed to see and not see, and that is a concern that everybody should be a little bit nervous about, I think.
I agree. But I mean, and again, it's if you saw The Social Network, Mark Zuckerberg's famous line is, well, if you were going to create Facebook, you would have created Facebook.
Yeah.
But I feel like Mark Zuckerberg, and I don't know the man, I haven't learned enough about him to have an intelligent opinion, truly, but in a way he was a little bit like L. Ron Hubbard. He stumbled upon something fundamental. L. Ron Hubbard about psychiatry, and then it just became a cult. As he once said, the quickest way to make $1 million in Los Angeles is to start a religion. He did say that. And he was involved with Jack Parsons out here in Pasadena and all that stuff. Anyway, I lost my train of thought, but we just have to be careful about technology. Okay, on Facebook, do you think Mark Zuckerberg understood sort of our collective angst and humans need to have reinforcement, adulation, and likes? Likes and shares have become like the currency of our ego. And I've fallen prey to it. And I think my wife will tell you I'm a pretty cocky guy. I think it's probably covering insecurities. But those insecurities are laid bare when you're going on and, who shared my thing and who commented and how many total. And it gets to be, a definition of who you are. And that's not good. That's not good. And that's why all these studies showing, social media is not healthy for you. I agree. The tech giant, we fell in love with this technology. We thought it was, the greatest thing. And I do believe when you see people walking around with their phones, you could write a great sci-fi screenplay by saying it was the aliens that gave us Facebook because we're so damn distracted. We don't see them reaping and plundering our resources because we're, sharing, a angry, Donald Trump tweet or something. Yeah. We comes along these times. We're just like learning about human nature through technology and how vulnerable we are to be manipulated. What happens next time when they start they can create fake personas and look what the Russians did. I mean, let's talk about Russia talking about manipulating technology to harm us. I want to do to Putin 10 times what he's done to us, but he's taken advantage of American insecurity. It's not right.
Well, I think what we're finding out is that we're finding it's amplified through social media, right? It's amplified. It's the darkness in our hearts. I mean, Zuckerberg wanted to meet girls in college.
Right.
So he kind of created this thing that would be good to meet girls, right? So you take that, which is a normal instinct, and you start to amplify it, and it starts to go and go. And now, next thing you know, you hate your neighbor.
Yep.
Who's supposed to be your friend.
Right. I know. It used to, I was thinking, back when I was growing up, it took effort to be a jerk. If you wanted to write an angry letter to a newspaper, you had to find a piece of paper. You had to roll it into your typewriter. You had to type it up, use whiteout or what the ribbon to correct it. You had to look up in the phone book the address of the paper, put a stamp on it, and hope it gets published. Today, people go on Twitter and go, that cat is stupid. We have to be very careful. And I think it actually, a lot of it started with the car. And this idea that we can be by ourselves, go any place, what seems such a emblem of freedom and mobility and progressiveness sure backfired on us. And, I'm hoping that we get out of the car and off our phones. And, it's the divide is so bad in America that have you noticed that we don't only demonize our enemy? You mean somebody in the other party? We also make them cartoon characters, But I honestly think that if you were sitting face to face, the biggest MAGA person and the most woke millennial, if you sat them down together for an hour and said, "Don't talk about politics," I bet you they would be sharing their numbers. That they'd be talking about why they hate the Eagles, or why ramen is overrated or something, or about, your kid has asthma, mine has diabetes. It is easier just not to look at people as humans when you're going across a platform.
I love your automobile correlation, because I see this. I have high school kids, and a lot of their friends have no interest at all in driving.
Yeah,
none, because they have this. They don't.
Yes.
Our freedom was tied to the keys to the car when we were kids.
Right.
Their freedom is already here. They don't need personal interaction, and they don't really need to go anywhere.
Yeah, and also their levels of anxiety, depression, other things have gone up. But I do like the fact that they're not as addicted to the car, and they're not my daughters, or they're not materialistic. And I actually think the beginning of America's hopefully positive turn is going to come. We get enough millennials in office, and they're problem solvers. They're wary of technology. I'm not always for people that are easily offended, but we need folks in there that have lived through the worst of it. And when you have when my daughters were in high school and Facebook was around, that can be an incredibly cruel place. When I was in school, I just got the crap kicked out of me by bullies, but I didn't have somebody spreading lies over thousands of people on the internet. So
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yeah.
Yes. In 1913, the only Facebook was a book you put your face into.
Yeah.
So.
Well, listen, this has been awesome. And just so everybody knows, like we did this on the fly. We had someone else scheduled, but Chip was great enough to come in and sit down with us. And man, I appreciate it. I love historical novels. I love that you're in there, like doing the work to expose us to these characters that we forget about them,
Yeah.
Griffith J. Griffith, all these people that created Southern California, good and bad, like here's the legacy of where they are. And it's just neat to put people, to bring them back from the dead and go, let's look at these characters in this time and how it was, just thanks for doing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. And, I hope the book gives people hope, will make them laugh. It was still, we weren't in this particular fraught second, which I think will be okay come January 20th. But I wanted to write something that made people giggle, that made people cover their mouth because I wrote something bawdy, that will open their eyes, and maybe when they're done with the book, they'll go do some research. I did really honestly want to do that. I've written about enough heavy subjects over the course of my career that I didn't want to give people 8 or 9 hours of just entertainment, and folks that thought my book wasn't serious enough or didn't, glorify those that have already gotten plenty of glory. I don't care. I want to appeal to somebody stuck in an apartment that needs a reason, to go in the corner and smile. I mean that with every bit of my soul.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Small as that soul is.
Yeah. And I just, because you picked 1913, it's important to realize the Model T was the primary car back then,
Yes,
which
it was.
was basically just an evolution of the horse-drawn carriage. It still had a spoken hub, wooden wheel.
Right.
You know, people who were wheelwrights were still employed regularly.
Yep.
This is a completely different time, and yet it resembles a lot of who we are today. I love that, man. I love it.
It's true. And I'll just say one last thing. You know, when I was researching about the bridge, the motto that the Chamber of Commerce, I mean, back when the bridge was built, it was really the Chamber of Commerce that got it built, not city government. City government out here was intentionally weak. Their motto was automobiles, not horses.
Right.
Isn't that funny? And, you know, those poor horses, I guess they later, went to Santa Anita racetrack or something, but we were replacing those horses as fast as we were candles.
Yeah.
So,
well, listen, come back when the next book is out. Definitely everybody go to Amazon to get Arroyo. There's a link if you're watching live. And then if you're not, if you're listening on the podcast side, that stuff will be in the show notes. Thank you to you, Eric, for hanging in there with me and adapting. Yeah, and again, Chip, thanks so much for doing that. If anybody wants to find out more about Chip, just simple, chipjacobs.com, super easy. And you can read all about what he's doing, get Arroyo from his website. As far as I'm concerned, just want to say thanks again, man, for coming on. I know it's fun to scramble, and you did a great job.
Thank you. It's the old reporter in me. Anyway, God bless you guys. Stay safe and have me back on any time because the next book, goes directly to the heart of real estate and why I'm glad I'm not a property owner. See you guys.
All right, stand by. I'm going to shut off everything. Hold on.
All right.